I never expected a single leaf to bring me back so vividly. It fell from the oak above, brittle and yellowed, landing at my feet as I strolled through the quiet park. The crisp autumn air carried the faint scent of damp earth and fading grass, and for a moment I was no longer 70, I was 17 again. Standing at the edge of the city streets, my uniform slightly too large, my shoes scuffed from long hours on the bus. I had been a fare inspector, what people called a transit controller, for most of my adult life in America. The job was a mix of routine and unpredictability. Every day, I walked aisles of buses and trolleys, greeting some passengers, challenging others, and keeping an eye on the rhythm of the city. The smell of worn leather seats, the faint odor of exhaust, the occasional whiff of someone's lunch, and the cold metal poles beneath my hands, these were the textures of my world. I remember my youth in detail. The small apartment above my father's shop, the way morning sunlight slipped through the curtains, the clatter of dishes and the faint scent of his pipe tobacco. School wasn't easy, but I had a knack for numbers, a patience for details, and a respect for rules. Those traits carried me into my first job with the transit system, a job that promised stability in a world that often felt unsteady. My first day as a controller was intimidating. The buses were alive, the passengers unpredictable. I wore a crisp uniform and a badge that felt heavier than it should, the weight of responsibility pressing against my chest. Some passengers were kind, offering polite smiles and nods. Others challenged me, questioned my authority, tested the limits. And I learned quickly, not just how to check tickets, but how to read people, how to anticipate conflict before it erupted, how to maintain calm when the world pressed against you. That first day set the tone for decades. I built relationships with regular passengers, shared small jokes with drivers, and found camaraderie with fellow controllers, men and women who understood the subtle dance of city transit. There were moments of frustration, yes, and occasional arguments, but there were also fleeting instances of grace, a smile from a tired mother, a nod from a businessman running late, the quiet satisfaction of keeping the system moving smoothly. And as I stood there in the park, the leaf at my feet, I realized how profoundly those years had shaped me. The discipline, the patience, the understanding of humanity in all its flawed beauty. I took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp air, and for a moment I was young again, walking the bustling streets, my eyes wide with the weight and wonder of life unfolding. My first solo route felt like stepping onto a moving stage. The bus rattled beneath me as I climbed aboard, the engine's hum vibrating through my shoes. The driver gave me a nod of encouragement, and I took my place in the aisle, ticket punch in hand, heart thudding with anticipation. Passengers were a mosaic of the city's life. Shopkeepers with tired eyes, mothers juggling babies and grocery bags, students buried in books, and elderly men nodding off in the back. Some greeted me politely, others muttered under their breath, suspicious of the uniform and badge. I learned quickly how to gauge moods, how to read gestures, the subtle signs of frustration or fatigue. Every glance, every shift in posture told a story. I remember the smell of the buses, rubber, metal polish, and the faint trace of yesterday's sandwiches. Each route had its rhythm, the staccato stops, the sighs of brakes, the shuffle of feet, the ding of the bell. It became a kind of music, and I learned to move in sync with it, anticipating stops, easing conflicts, and finding the small victories hidden in routine. Some days were exhilarating. I would catch a fare evader in a moment of panic, gently guide them to the rules without anger, and watch their relief and respect afterward. Other days were humbling. A tired old man forgot his ticket, and I felt the weight of enforcing rules against someone who had spent a lifetime abiding by them. It wasn't just about fare collection. It was about fairness, patience, and sometimes compassion. I also met the other controllers, people who became my daily companions in the silent battles of city life. We shared stories during breaks, laughed at absurd incidents, and learned from each other's mistakes. Friendship grew from shared exhaustion, mutual respect, and the unspoken understanding that the city relied on us, and we relied on one another. By the end of my first month, I felt both drained and invigorated. The streets, the buses, the people, they had become an extension of me. I could anticipate the rush hour chaos, the late-night drifters, the peculiar habits of regular passengers. I was becoming part of the pulse of the city, and in that rhythm I found both purpose and pride. As weeks turned into months, the job revealed its hidden layers. Not every day was about checking tickets and keeping order. Some days carried the weight of human struggle, the quiet despair of those who had no choice but to rely on public transit. I remember one evening, a man in a worn coat, shivering on the bench, fumbling for change he didn't have. His eyes met mine, not with anger, but with a silent plea for understanding. I let him ride, scribbling a note in my log as a reminder to report him for support services later. Conflicts became inevitable. Teenagers testing boundaries, exhausted commuters snapping over a late bus, drivers frustrated with schedules that never seemed to account for real life. I learned to navigate these situations like a tightrope walker, balancing authority with empathy. The metallic clang of bus doors, the squeak of brakes, and the faint perfume of passengers blended into a sensory map of tension and relief, warning and comfort. And I also began noticing the small victories, the gratitude that sometimes went unnoticed. A tired mother offering a soft thank you when I guided her through a busy boarding. A young man nodding respectfully after I caught him trying to sneak past the fare gate, not with shame, but with understanding. Those moments were fleeting, but they stitched a quiet pride into my chest. Then there were the oddities, the people who challenged the rules in bizarre ways. A man once tried to ride with a cage of birds balanced on his lap. Another brought a full pot of soup, navigating the aisles like a makeshift waiter. My uniform, my badge, my authority were the anchors in these small storms, and I learned to face the absurd with patience and humor. Friendships deepened among my fellow controllers. During breaks, we swapped stories about impossible passengers, late-night scares, and moments of human kindness. I remember sharing a thermos of coffee with George, a man with a crooked smile and a sharp wit, as we laughed over the antics of a passenger who had tried to bribe us with a half-eaten sandwich. Those connections were a lifeline, a reminder that the city was not just concrete and metal, it was alive with lives that intersected in small, fragile ways. By the end of that year, I had grown into the role, carrying the pulse of the city in my chest, the rhythm of buses in my steps, and the stories of strangers tucked into my mind. I was no longer just a young man learning the ropes. I was a guardian of the flow, a silent witness to the lives of hundreds every day. And I felt the profound weight and quiet joy of it all. After a few years, the job began to take its toll. The long hours on crowded buses, the constant vigilance, the responsibility of keeping order. It wore on me in ways I hadn't anticipated. My back ached from standing too long, my feet were perpetually sore, and there were days when the relentless flow of human frustration felt heavier than any metal pole I gripped. But the exhaustion wasn't just physical, it was emotional. I carried the city's weight on my shoulders, even when I left the bus behind. I would go home thinking about the people I'd seen that day. The young mother who seemed on the verge of tears, the elderly man whose hands trembled as he counted coins, the teenager who had finally listened after a tense confrontation. Each story lingered, tugging at my heart, reminding me that my job was never just about tickets. Mary noticed the change before I did. She would meet me at the door with a warm meal, her hands brushing soot and dust from my sleeves, her eyes asking questions I didn't always answer. Sometimes I would sit at the kitchen table, staring at my hands, worn and calloused, thinking about the years ahead and wondering how long I could keep this up. There were small victories, too, moments that reminded me why I stayed. A little boy who waved as I boarded the bus, a grateful smile from a passenger I'd helped navigate a confusing route, a kind word from a driver who had become more than a coworker, a friend, a brother in the quiet chaos of city transit. Those moments were fleeting but bright, like shards of sunlight bouncing off a window, and they kept me going through the long gray stretches. At night, I would lie awake, thinking about the city, the rhythm of its buses, the faces I had seen, and the stories I had collected. The job demanded patience, resilience, and empathy in equal measure. And slowly, I realized it was shaping me as much as I was shaping it. I was learning to see the humanity in every frustrated, tired, joyous, and confused face that crossed my path. The city had become part of me, just as I had become part of its pulse, and even as the fatigue pressed against me, I felt a quiet pride in the work I did, knowing that in my own small way I had helped keep its heart beating. One autumn morning, the city felt tense, as if the very air had thickened. Rumors of a transit strike had been swirling for days, and the mood among passengers and staff alike was uneasy. I remember climbing aboard the bus, badge in place, ticket punch at my side, heart thumping with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The familiar rhythm of the route was disrupted by whispers, nervous glances, and the sharp edge of uncertainty. A group of commuters argued heatedly over a late connection, voices rising over the hum of the engine. I stepped carefully into the aisle, my uniform a signal of authority, but also of calm. "Please, everyone, let's stay calm," I said, my voice firm but steady. Some looked at me with irritation, others seemed relieved that someone could guide them through the confusion. I learned then that authority was not about power. It was about presence, about being the anchor when chaos threatened to tip the balance. That day I witnessed the city in miniature. Tension, frustration, resilience, and fleeting acts of kindness. A woman offered her seat to an elderly man. A teenager helped a mother juggle grocery bags, and drivers exchanged silent nods of understanding as they navigated the snarled streets. Each gesture, no matter how small, reminded me why I loved this job, even in its most exhausting moments. I also had my own tests of patience. A passenger tried to argue his way past the fare, insisting that the strike exempted him. I listened, acknowledged his frustration, and calmly explained the rules. By the end of the confrontation, he had softened, offering a reluctant thanks. These moments, high tension, quick thinking, empathy under pressure, were the heart of my work. Even among my fellow controllers, the strike brought both tension and solidarity. We shared hurried coffee breaks in empty stations, swapping stories of impossible passengers, of buses delayed, of nerves frayed to the breaking point. And yet, beneath the exhaustion, there was pride. Pride in our ability to maintain order, to guide people safely, to keep the city moving despite uncertainty. That day ended long after sunset. The streets quieter now, the buses emptying into depots. As I walked home, the crisp evening air brushing my face, I felt the familiar mix of fatigue and satisfaction. My hands ached, my feet throbbed, but my spirit was lifted. I had faced disorder and emerged steady, a witness to the city's resilience and a participant in its quiet heroism. A few years into my tenure, I began mentoring younger controllers who joined the system, wide-eyed and uncertain, unsure of how to navigate the crowds, the schedules, and the personalities that came with the job. I took pride in guiding them, teaching them not just the rules, but the art of understanding people, the unspoken cues, the little gestures, the moments when a firm hand needed to be gentle. I remember teaching Emily, a new recruit, barely out of college. She was nervous, fumbling with the ticket scanner, eyes darting at every impatient glance. I stood beside her during her first busy route, showing her how to anticipate the flow of passengers, when to speak softly, when to assert authority, and when simply to listen. By the end of the week, she moved with confidence, a quiet smile crossing her face as she navigated the chaos with grace. That sense of accomplishment, the passing on of knowledge, felt deeply rewarding, like a master passing a brush to an apprentice, ensuring the craft endured. Friendships deepened among the team. During long, cold mornings, we shared coffee and stories in the empty bus depots, laughing at the absurdities of the city and sharing frustrations over drivers, schedules, or passengers. George, my closest companion, had a crooked grin and a knack for reading people that I envied. We leaned on each other during long shifts, finding humor in small victories. A fare dispute resolved peacefully. A lost child safely reunited with their parents. A passenger's heartfelt thanks that warmed even the frostiest morning. But the job wasn't without its disappointments. I saw colleagues leave for better-paying work, saw friendships tested by disagreements over policy enforcement or favoritism. I felt the sting of betrayal once when a controller I had trusted spread rumors that threatened my standing with management. It hurt more than any difficult passenger ever could. But it taught me resilience, the importance of discretion, and the value of those who truly stood by me. Through it all, the city remained our ever-present stage. The rhythmic clatter of wheels, the hiss of brakes, the smell of exhaust mingled with coffee and pastries, the murmur of conversations and the occasional shout, all became the soundtrack of my life. I came to understand the pulse of the streets, the subtle shifts in energy, the way the city breathed and moved as one living organism. And as I walked home each evening, weary but fulfilled, I realized that my life as a controller was not just a job. It was a tapestry of human stories, of challenges faced and lessons learned, of laughter shared and trust earned. I had become part of something larger than myself, and it shaped me as much as I shaped it. Amid the chaos and routine of the job, life outside the buses and stations continued, often in ways that left a lasting imprint. Mary entered my life like a quiet sunrise, unassuming, yet impossible to ignore. I first noticed her at the corner cafe near the main depot, hair catching the morning light, a book in her hands. Over time, our paths crossed more frequently. Small conversations growing into long talks over coffee, walks after evening shifts, laughter shared in moments of reprieve from the city's relentless pulse. Balancing love and work wasn't always easy. There were nights I came home late, boots muddied from the rain, uniform damp, exhausted in body and spirit. Mary never complained. She would wake with a warm meal, listening patiently as I recounted the day's trials, the rude passenger, the fare dispute, the small kindnesses. She became my anchor, her presence a steady force amidst the unpredictable currents of the streets. Fatherhood arrived quietly. Michael, my son, entered our lives, and suddenly the rhythm of my days shifted. The early morning shifts, the long hours on crowded buses, the constant vigilance. All of it now intertwined with diaper changes, bedtime stories, and the tremor of responsibility that only a parent knows. The job was demanding, but it taught me patience and observation, skills that carried over into guiding and nurturing my son. There were losses, too. Friends who left the job, colleagues who succumbed to illness, passengers whose stories ended in sadness. I felt deeply for each, the city's sorrows pressing against my heart as much as its daily rhythms. I learned to grieve quietly, to hold the memory of those moments without letting them cloud the work I still had to do. Yet the joys were abundant. The day Michael took his first solo bus ride, beaming with pride as I waved from the aisle. The letter from a passenger thanking me for patience that restored their faith in humanity. The laughter shared with colleagues during breaks, the warmth of Mary's hand in mine as we walked home under the street lights. These were the moments that etched themselves into memory, blending with the city's pulse to create a life rich in experience, empathy, and love. By the end of that year, I understood something vital. My work was more than a paycheck. It was a lens through which I experienced the full spectrum of human life: love, frustration, loss, joy, and connection. And through it all, Mary and Michael reminded me that no matter the chaos on the streets, the heart of my life was at home, in the quiet and constant presence of family. Years passed, and the city seemed to change almost overnight. New routes were added, schedules became tighter, and the technology we used evolved. Yet some days still brought the unpredictability that defined the job, the moments that reminded me why I had chosen it and why I loved it despite the exhaustion. One rainy afternoon, I encountered a scene that would stay with me for years. A minor accident had blocked the intersection near a busy bus stop. Commuters jostled, drivers honked, and the usual rhythm of the streets had dissolved into chaos. I stepped off the bus, my uniform damp from the rain, badge glinting in the gray light, and took a deep breath. In that moment, my role wasn't just checking tickets. It was to calm, guide, and protect. I helped direct passengers to safe areas, coordinated with drivers and emergency personnel, and even comforted a young woman whose stroller had toppled in the confusion. Her gratitude was palpable, her hands shaking as she clutched my arm, eyes wide with relief. I realized then that the job had become more than a profession. It was a responsibility to the people, a trust placed in me every day, in every interaction. Emergencies tested more than patience, they tested morality. I faced moments where rules and compassion clashed, deciding when to enforce fair regulations strictly and when to allow leniency, choosing to intervene in disputes or step back and let people find their own resolution. The weight of those decisions rested heavily on me, shaping the way I saw the city, my role in it, and even myself. Amid these challenges, friendships and camaraderie proved essential. I leaned on colleagues like George and Emily, exchanging quick glances and subtle signals during tense moments, and sharing stories of near misses and small triumphs once the day's work ended. Their support was unwavering, a reminder that we were not alone in the trenches of urban life. Even at home, I carried fragments of the city with me: the smell of wet asphalt, the faint hum of engines, the echo of hurried footsteps. Mary would sometimes notice my quiet contemplation, a distant look in my eyes, and I'd share just enough of the day's events to relieve the weight, keeping the deeper anxieties tucked away. By the end of that week, soaked, exhausted, yet quietly proud, I understood that these moments, the emergencies, the chaos, the moral balancing acts, were what defined the job. They were the moments that made the daily grind meaningful, that taught me resilience, empathy, and the subtle artistry of human interaction in a city that never truly slept. By the time I reached my 50s, I began to feel the physical weight of the years pressing against me. My knees ached after long shifts, my back groaned when I bent too quickly, and my hands, once nimble and steady, sometimes shook when gripping the metal poles for hours on end. The city, which had once seemed alive and vibrant under my feet, now felt heavier, its rhythms more taxing. Emotionally, the toll was no less significant. I carried decades of human stories, frustration, joy, sorrow, gratitude, all folded into the quiet corners of my mind. Some nights the memories of a struggling mother, a lost child, or an elderly man left behind weighed heavily, keeping sleep at bay. I found myself reflecting more often, wondering what legacy I would leave, and whether the years of effort had truly mattered. Yet even amidst fatigue, there were moments of grace. A young mother offered me a smile that reached her eyes. A regular passenger gave a small nod of acknowledgement, as if to say, "You've made my commute bearable." These fleeting gestures reminded me why I stayed so long, why I endured, why I had dedicated so much of my life to this city and its people. I also began mentoring newer controllers with greater patience and empathy, realizing that the knowledge I had accumulated could serve as a guide for those just starting. I shared stories not just of procedures, but of humanity, the small acts of kindness that mattered more than rules, the wisdom gained from years of observing life at its rawest, most honest moments. At home, Mary and Michael noticed the subtle changes. I no longer bounced out of bed with youthful vigor, but there was still a quiet pride in my eyes. Family became the anchor I leaned on, their laughter and warmth balancing the exhaustion that came from decades of service. Our evenings were filled with stories, gentle conversation, and the comfort of shared presence, a refuge from the relentless pace of the city. And so, as I walked home each evening, leaning slightly more on my cane,
Feeling the city's pulse through aching joints and tired muscles, I understood the depth of my journey. The years had shaped me, physically, emotionally, spiritually. And even as my body reminded me of its limits, my heart remained bound to the streets, the buses, the passengers, and the work that had defined the largest part of my life. Retirement began to loom like a distant horizon, both promising and terrifying. I had spent decades immersed in the city's heartbeat, in the intricate dance of buses, passengers, and controllers. To step away felt like stepping off a familiar bridge into an uncertain void. The thought of leaving the streets, the smells of asphalt and metal, the hum of engines, and the rhythm of footsteps weighed heavily on me. I started noticing the small things more, the way a young boy clutched his backpack as he climbed aboard, the smile of an elderly woman relieved to see a friendly face scanning tickets, the brief nod of acknowledgement from drivers I had worked alongside for years. These little interactions, once routine, now struck me with bittersweet intensity. Each moment was a reminder that I was nearing the end of a life's chapter. Family life, too, shifted in importance. Michael was grown, carving his own path, and Mary remained my steadfast anchor. They celebrated the idea of retirement, seeing it as a reward for decades of tireless work, yet I could not help but feel a twinge of loss. The streets had been my canvas, my stage, my classroom. I had taught, guided, and protected hundreds of lives, and now the curtain was slowly falling. There were moments of quiet reflection as I walked the familiar routes once last. I remembered the first ferry waiter I gently guided, the passengers who confided small pieces of their lives, the rush hours that had once seemed chaotic but now seemed like a symphony of human experience. Each memory carried a weight and a warmth, a reminder of why I had endured the long hours, the difficult days, and the relentless demands of the city. Colleagues offered congratulations and shared stories of their own retirements, but nothing could replicate the personal reckoning I felt. It was as if I were saying goodbye not just to a job, but to decades of purpose, connection, and identity. And yet, amidst the melancholy, there was pride. Pride in knowing I had served the city and its people faithfully, with integrity, compassion, and patience. By the end of my final week, I walked home with a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and a quiet, profound gratitude. The city had shaped me, challenged me, and given me stories to carry forever. Retirement was not an end, but a turning of the page, a chance to savor the life I had built, to reflect on the journey, and to appreciate the legacy of service, humanity, and connection I had left behind. Retirement arrived quietly, without fanfare or ceremony. The badge hung in its frame on the wall, the uniform neatly folded, and the bus depot became a memory rather than a daily reality. The city, which had once seemed a world I navigated with practiced steps and vigilant eyes, now moved past me in a slower, more distant rhythm. At first it felt strange, almost disorienting, not to be part of its pulse, not to witness the settled dramas of commuters and drivers unfolding in real time. I began taking walks through familiar streets, watching the city as an observer rather than a participant. The hum of engines, the chatter of passengers, the metallic clang of doors, all of it remained, yet I no longer carried responsibility for it. I noticed things I had overlooked in the busyness of duty: a father helping his child tie a shoelace, the scent of fresh bread drifting from a corner bakery, the way sunlight caught the edges of skyscrapers in the late afternoon. The city felt alive in a different way, intimate and profound, like an old friend revealing new facets I had never taken the time to see. Mary and I filled our days with quiet routines and small adventures. We explored neighborhoods we had once hurried past, lingered in cafes without a watch ticking over our shoulders, and spent evenings recounting stories from my career, the victories, the absurdities, the challenges, and the fleeting moments of connection that had made the years meaningful. Michael visited often, sharing his own successes and struggles, and I realized that my life's work had created ripples beyond the buses and stations, extending into the lives of my family.
I also felt a strange liberation. Without the constant demands of the job, I could reflect, savor, and appreciate the tapestry of experiences I had collected. The friendships forged over decades, the lessons learned in the crowded aisles of buses, the quiet acts of kindness I had witnessed, all of it became a source of contentment and pride. Yet, sometimes I missed the immediacy of it, the way a passenger's gratitude could brighten a long day, the camaraderie of colleagues, the rhythm of the city beneath my feet. But in its absence, I found perspective, gratitude, and a deeper appreciation for the life I had lived, for the service I had rendered, and for the people I had touched along the way. With each passing day in retirement, I felt the layers of my life settling into a quiet clarity. The job that had once consumed me, the constant vigilance, the long hours, the unending flow of passengers, had shaped not only my body and mind, but my soul. I began to see how every interaction, every decision, every act of patience or firmness had carved a path of personal growth I could now trace clearly. I remembered the first time I had comforted a lost child on a crowded bus, the gratitude in the parent's eyes, and how it had awakened a sense of responsibility and empathy I hadn't known I possessed. I thought of the countless fare disputes, the small arguments that required diplomacy and tact, and the ways I had learned to read human behavior, to anticipate reactions, to navigate tension with calm authority. These lessons, honed in the bustle of the city, had become part of who I was, and they guided me even in retirement. Friendships forged in the depot and on long night shifts took on a new significance. I wrote letters to old colleagues, met them for coffee when we could, and relived the stories of long-forgotten mornings and nights. We laughed over the absurdities, mourned the losses, and celebrated the victories, small and large. In these connections, I found continuity, a tether to the life I had built, and the people who had shared it with me. Mary remained my anchor. She understood the quiet satisfaction I felt in reflection, the pride in knowing I had done work that mattered, and the comfort that came from seeing the ripple effects of a life spent serving others. Michael, now grown and independent, often remarked how he had learned patience, empathy, and integrity from watching his father navigate the complexities of a city and its people. I also began to understand the subtle ways in which my career had impacted the city itself. A little kindness extended to a stranger, a problem diffused with calm words, a lost commuter helped back on track. These small actions accumulated over decades, shaping lives in ways I might never fully know. And though I no longer wore the uniform, no longer stood at the front of a crowded bus, I realized that my work had left a lasting imprint. The weight of responsibility was gone, but the wisdom remained. I felt a deep gratitude for the life I had lived. The struggles, the triumphs, the friendships, the love, and the moments of quiet revelation. In the stillness of retirement, I finally understood the full measure of my journey and the profound satisfaction of having given my best to the people and the city I loved. As the days of retirement unfolded, I discovered a new rhythm, slower, gentler, yet filled with its own richness. I took to long walks through neighborhoods I had once hurried past, noticing the architectural details, the laughter of children in playgrounds, and the subtle changes that seasons brought to familiar streets. Each step felt like a meditation, a way to honor both the city I had served and the life I had built within it. I returned to old hobbies that had been sidelined for years. I dug out my camera, a dusty relic from my younger days, and began photographing the city's quiet corners, the golden light spilling over brick facades, reflections on rain-slicked streets, the interplay of shadows in alleys I had once passed without notice. Photography, I realized, was another way to observe humanity, another way to capture fleeting moments of connection and emotion, much like I had done daily as a controller. Mary encouraged me to write. At first, I resisted, unsure that words could capture the intensity of decades spent in constant motion. But soon, stories began to form. Tales of passengers, colleagues, unexpected acts of kindness, and lessons learned from the city's relentless pulse. Writing became a companion, a way to process memories, to preserve moments that might otherwise fade, and to leave a legacy for Michael, for family, and perhaps for strangers who might find resonance in the stories. Friendships continued to flourish, though in a quieter, more deliberate manner. George and Emily often met me for coffee, and we laughed about the absurdities of our shared past. We reflected on how the city had changed, how our roles had shaped our character, and how, despite the chaos, we had remained anchored in empathy and resilience. And yet, nostalgia was never without its pangs. I sometimes missed the immediacy of the job, the rush of a crowded bus, the challenge of diffusing tension, the satisfaction of helping someone in need. But these memories were sweet bitter, comforting rather than aching, like the smell of rain on asphalt or the hum of engines in the distance. They reminded me that my life had been full, meaningful, and lived with purpose. Through photography, writing, and quiet observation, I found a new way to engage with the world. I saw the city's pulse not through the lens of duty, but through the eyes of a man who had walked its streets for decades, who had shaped and been shaped by its people, and who now could savor the depth of life from a place of gratitude, reflection, and peace. The years of retirement taught me to embrace the passage of time with a quiet reverence. My body no longer moved with the speed and stamina of youth, but each ache, each wrinkle, each silver strand in my hair told a story of endurance, perseverance, and a life fully lived. I learned to find beauty in the slow mornings, the long afternoons, and the still evenings where Mary and I would sit by the window, watching the city breathe and the seasons change. I often thought about legacy, not in grandiose terms, but in the subtle, enduring ways a life of service leaves its mark. The passengers I had helped, the colleagues I had guided, the small acts of empathy I had extended in moments of crisis, all of it became part of an invisible tapestry woven through the lives of countless strangers. And within my own family, I saw the reflection of those lessons. Michael carried patience and respect for others. Mary carried the quiet pride and warmth of a life shared.
Occasionally, I revisited the bus depot,
Not to work, but to greet old friends. To remember the smells of polished metal, worn leather seats, and the faint tang of exhaust that had once been omnipresent. The depot had changed, new faces had arrived, and technology had transformed the way the city moved, but the essence remained. The pulse of a city shaped by its people, by the stories that unfolded within it. I felt a growing sense of peace with my own mortality, a comfort in knowing that I had given my best in every role I had undertaken. The doubts, the challenges, the mistakes, they were all part of the journey, teaching me resilience, empathy, and the importance of human connection. The city had been both teacher and companion, and in its rhythm I had found meaning, identity, and purpose. In the quiet of my home, I often reflected on the gratitude I had received. The smiles, the nods, the thank you notes tucked into my locker, the occasional heartfelt letters from passengers whose lives had been touched by small acts of patience or kindness. Those moments were priceless, more valuable than any recognition or material reward, and they reminded me that a life of service, of attention to the human soul, is one of the most profound gifts one can give. Now, at 70, I sit in the park where it all began, the golden leaves drifting to the ground, the sunlight filtering softly through branches. I watch the city move around me, the rhythm slower now, yet still alive. Children laugh, couples stroll, and strangers pass with brief smiles. I feel the pulse of the city, not as a worker, not as a controller, but as a man who has lived deeply within its heart. I think of Mary, still by my side, and of Michael carving his own path with the lessons and love we've shared. I remember every bus ride, every challenge, every laugh, every tear, the moments that shaped me, tested me, and ultimately defined me. Each encounter, each story, each fleeting connection built the mosaic of my life. There were regrets, of course, small ones, mostly about missed opportunities or hurried moments, but they are eclipsed by gratitude. I am grateful for the friendships forged, the kindness given and received, and the countless ways my work allowed me to touch lives and be touched in return. I am grateful for the chaos and the calm, the challenges and the victories, the love and the losses. I am happy, truly, profoundly happy, not because life was perfect, but because it was real, rich, and fully lived. I walked the streets of America with purpose, met its people with openness, and navigated its trials with integrity. And now, in the quiet of reflection, I understand that I could not have wished for a better journey. As I rise and continue my walk, a gentle smile spreads across my face. The city hums softly around me, and I carry it with me, not as a duty, not as a responsibility, but as a treasure. My life, my story, my years of service, love, struggle, and joy, they are mine, and I am grateful beyond measure. In this quiet, golden moment, I feel complete. The streets taught me, the people shaped me, and the years rewarded me with a life worth every step. And that is all any man can hope for.